Hello and welcome to the Political Opinions Podcast, where every opinion is given equal footing and political tolerance and debate are given their proper attention in a world where both are on the decline. Today's episode will cover different opinions for and against the two-party political system. The two-party system has become a staple of particularly American politics, with the Democrats and Republicans being the only real contenders for any sort of political power, minus a few independents in the Senate and House of Representatives. While not entirely the case for other Western democracies such as the UK, which has many smaller parties, we too have two dominant parties, that being Labour and the Conservatives, and in most countries that do not use proportional representation, and even some that do, you will often end up with two dominant political parties. The two-party system has been hailed by some as being important for stability and other benefits. It has also, however, been criticised by some for causing, for example, legislative gridlock. In this episode, we will go over these different opinions and compare them. Quick reminder, the aim of this episode is not to try and argue for or against one side of the debate, but rather to highlight the different opinions on the topic and provide a comparison between them. I will begin with the arguments in favour of the two-party system, followed by those opposed, with a comparison at the end. The first argument in favour of a two-party system follows that it brings more stability to a political system than if there were many different parties. Through the process of having two parties, one of them is almost always guaranteed to have a majority unless it's split 50-50, and in the case of countries such as the UK, Labour and the Conservatives almost always have a majority even with the existence of other parties. This is beneficial to some, as it allows the governing party to be more efficient in passing legislation and enacting changes on the basis that they can do so without having to enact support from other parties. If there were lots of parties, for example in a coalition, that had to compromise and agree with each other to pass legislation, it would be far more problematic and could cause more instability. All one has to do is look at the high number of disputes between the Conservatives and Liberal Democrat coalition from 2010 to 2015 to see the problems that can arise. Some argue that a two-party system also allows for greater representation of views within the governing party. For a two-party system to exist, both parties must be what is known as a broad church, which essentially means that they incorporate many different viewpoints. For example, the Labour Party has people who are centre-left and people who are much further left-wing, all in the same party. This means that the governing party is likely to have many different viewpoints represented in it, but they all seem to obtain a similar ideological goal. For example, Labour all seek to push for greater equality and benefit those of the lower classes, although the way and the extent to which they do it may be different. This is strengthened when combined with the point above, on the basis that many parties compromising have to incorporate different viewpoints into a coalition. For example, the Labour Party in New Zealand had to align with a centre-right party, which had a very different ideological foundation. A two-party system also helps prevent fringe parties from being able to gain a footing in the political system. Extremist parties such as the BNP in the UK have never had any electoral success on the basis that they simply do not have enough nationwide support to even get close to winning a constituency. Furthermore, because the two-party system allows a broad church, it prevents many people from feeling excluded, especially on the basis that the vast majority of voters exist near the centre of the political system, and as such are more than likely to align with one of the two main political parties. Normally, furthermore, the party which wins in the two-party system has the most support within that election, and as such, even if not a majority voted for it, the largest proportion of voters supporting the government party are the ones which are going to be represented the most. And as such, a two-party system still gets close to being legitimate, and given the benefits these people see in a two-party system, to some, the lack of total and absolute majorities does not necessarily matter. And then finally, some argue that having a two-party system allows for a predictable and stable political process over time, which can help prevent radical actions which may in the short term be beneficial, but to some could be problematic over time. The first argument opposing a two-party system is that it is less efficient than a multi-party system, on the basis that the two parties in government will constantly be in dispute. The best example of this is in America, whereby if the House of Representatives and the Senate are controlled by different parties, then very little gets done, and we have what is known as parliamentary ping-pong, whereby bills are constantly rejected and sent back by the different parties, and as such little can be done if there is an absence of one party in total control. Some also claim that the two-party system allows for less representation of views, because although a party may consist of many viewpoints, the actions it undertakes will only follow the viewpoint of the dominant group. For example, although the Conservatives to this day are still divided on the issue of Brexit, the focus that they have taken is to support the Leave side, on the basis that the dominant and political leaders of the Conservative Party are in favour of Brexit. And as such, in many parties, although you have different ideologies, often one side finds their views ignored when a more radical side, or a side that takes a very particular stance on a more black and white issue, has control. While a two-party system prevents extremist views from obtaining power, it can also limit the inclusion of newer ideas. Often, the large two parties in a two-party system get stuck in more conservative opinions on the basis that they need to maintain their large and continuous electoral support base, and as such they are hesitant to adopt more extreme changes which may just be newer and more nuanced outlooks on particular issues. Furthermore, in a two-party system, the two parties tend to be relatively close to each other, obviously an outlier such as Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party, but on the most part the Conservatives and Labour both tend to be centre, and as such those with different views tend to be disregarded in favour of more popular and central views. Although the governing party may also have the most support, it doesn't always have a majority vote. In the UK, no government has had more than 50% of the popular vote since before World War II, and as such this is more proof that in a two-party system often it is undemocratic and the benefits are disproportionately distributed to the winning party. Furthermore, at times, two-party systems can also be unstable, because if there is an issue in which there is no compromise, for example the issue of Brexit is either leave or remain, there's no in-between on that, it can threaten to destroy a party. The Conservative Party, for example, was nearly torn apart due to the issue of Brexit, and if it had been, the UK political infrastructure would have been vastly unstable on the basis that one of the predominant powers is gone. And as such, on really divisive issues, a two-party system can be more unstable than a coalition, which can simply collapse and reform with different parties which share an outlook on a particular issue. And then finally, those opposing a two-party system believe that in the future it can be problematic, both because they are conservative and as such are more hesitant to enact proper changes, and also because if you are constantly changing between two parties, they are constantly undoing each other's policies rather. And although this isn't related to parties, this is best seen with the US presidential office, whereby the first thing most presidents do is repeal many of the unpopular or disputed actions of their predecessor. For example, Biden has already started repealing a high number of Donald Trump's more unpopular, to the Democrats at least, policies. Moving on now to a comparison. On the question of efficiency, those supporting a two-party system believe it is the most efficient means of government because it results in one party being in the majority, and as such they will be able to act as one united body, pass legislation and act on important issues much more effectively than a coalition which would have to agree between many different parties. Those on the other side, however, believe that a two-party system can be ineffective on the basis that you can have legislative gridlock, especially in the US, whereby different chambers controlled by different parties prevent each other from acting, and as such, with more parties, this is less likely to happen. On the question of the strength of the government, Those in favour of a two-party system believe that having one party in government results in a more powerful and effective governing force than if a coalition of multiple parties were to exist on the basis that they can much more easily collapse on different issues. However, those on the other side believe that having one single party in power may not always produce strength, as if they are divided on big issues, then they may be unable to respond, and depending on the political system, a government's strength can change very quickly. Theresa May's government was not strong at all, and even if she did have a majority, she was still quite a weak force in terms of a political leader, and as such was very problematic for her. On the question of representation of views, those supporting a two-party system believe having a broad church of ideas means that in a government with one party, and in the opposition potentially of one party, many views can still be represented, but through a more centralised and effective single political body or party. However, those opposing this view believe that often one group will come to dominate a party and prevent other views from being represented, and given large parties are usually near the centre of the political spectrum, it prevents more extreme and different views from being represented at all. On the issue of extremist views, those in favour of a two-party system believe that it can help prevent extremist views from gaining a foothold in a political system, which is beneficial for a country and allows more stable and continuous progress. Those opposing this, however, would point to the fact that most extremist views can still come to dominate big parties. All you have to do is look at populists in different political systems to see that even though they may be considered extreme by the political and social norms of a time, they can still dominate a party. Furthermore, by preventing more nuanced and potentially radical views which may just be different to the norms, you can prevent necessary change from occurring if you are resistant and hesitant to accept the change. On the question of stability, those favouring a two-party system believe it is more stable because there are only two parties and that a government is only formed of one party, and that if, for example, you were to have a coalition of many different parties, it would be problematic on the basis that they could very easily collapse over different issues. Those on the other side, however, believe that although you may have a government through a coalition which could collapse, they can both quickly reform with a different combination of parties, and when you look at most stable countries today, their coalitions are still stable. For example, Angela Merkel's government in Germany has been in coalitions numerous times, but she has still been a consistent and strong political leader, although her party doesn't have as much power as one party in a majority. She herself is a very strong leader, and as such a coalition is not detrimental. It's more in countries with external and internal issues that are too big even for one single party to solve, where a coalition can collapse more quickly. Those favouring a two-party system also believe that the future is better through having two parties, on the basis that you have stable and continuous progress, and you prevent a quick change of events constantly with different, more extreme views coming to dominate the political system through different and changing coalitions. For example, someone may point to consistent but slow economic growth, rather than having quick and rapid bubbles of economic growth followed by a quick and rapid collapse. Those on the other side, however, believe that with a two-party system you have limited change, because the parties are more conservative and thus resistant to change, and because in a game of electoral ping-pong, a lot of new government action involves undoing a lot of the previous government's actions. Progress over time can be very limited. Overall, those supporting the two-party system believe that they are broad churches which represent many views and favour the strong and stable approach that this system has when compared to a volatility of coalition governments, while those opposing the two-party system believe it can stifle representation and the introduction of new views, and can lead to political systems which become stuck and restrict future progress. The number of political parties which a political system has ultimately depends on the electoral system. If it's proportional, you will have more parties. If it's not proportional and, for example, first past the posts, you will tend to have a two-party system. Furthermore, the actions of political institutions, and the way the political system is organised can also influence this. For example, one of the reasons America has such a strong two-party system is due to the monetary and financial backings that they have. It is unlikely anything will change due to independence or new parties because they simply do not have the same level of funding which bigger parties have, and as such can't run Facebook and other social media advertising campaigns, can't afford to go around the country spreading their message, and as such it seems in America and in the UK the two-party system will continue for a very long time, and we will likely not see any form of change until one of these big parties will probably collapse over an issue that is even more divisive than that, for example, of Brexit, which hopefully won't be for a very long time. But ultimately though,